Alright, Broly and Invincible, Episode 8. Adam Eve finds Berserk Broly. Let's get to it. The silence in the wake of Battle Beast's involuntary departure was profound, broken only by the groans of the critically wounded building and the faint wet gasp from Mark's broken form. A fine dust sifted down from the cavernous hole in the ceiling, sparkling in the emergency lights. Rex Splode stared, his jaw hanging open, his early bravado completely evaporated. He pointed a trembling finger at the new, perfectly circular tunnel that now led through multiple floors and out into the night sky. What the hell is that? He whispered, the question hanging in the charged air. The sheer casual violence of it was beyond his comprehension. He'd seen power before, but this was different. This was basically a razor. Robot's head was tilted upward, his sensors whirring. As he calculated the structural damage, a cascade of red warnings flashed across his internal display. The primary and secondary support columns on the side of the building had been vaporized. The weight distribution is now critically unbalanced. His synthesized voice was as ever calm, but the urgency of his words were stark. The building's structural integrity is collapsing in on itself. We have to evacuate. Now. Before anyone could move, the sound came from below. It wasn't a roar of pain or effort. It was a raw, animalistic scream of pure, undiluted rage that seemed to originate from the very core of the planet itself. It vibrated up through the shattered floor, through the bones of the building, and into the very marrow of the heroes. The remaining glass shards in the windows rattled into frenzy before disintegrating. The entire casino floor lurched violently, tilting several degrees to one side as another major support gave way. Rex stumbled, catching himself on a mangled slot machine, his face already pale, and it went ashen. He looked from the hole Broly had created to the hole he had fallen into. That doesn't sound good at all, he stammered, his voice cracking with fear he didn't even try to hide. The sound wasn't just not good. It was the sound of a natural disaster that was given a voice. It was the sound of the contained, rational world ending, and something ancient and terrible waking up in its place, something legendary. Black Samson, clutching his wounded arm, barked orders with his military training kicking in. He's right. Move. Everyone to the east stairwell. It's the most reinforced. Robot, grab Invincible and be careful with him. As Robot moved to carefully lift Mark's horrifyingly limp body, the heroes began a frantic scramble towards the emergency exit. The terrifying roar from the sub-basement echoing around them, a promise that the real battle was just beginning, and they were no longer participants, but potential casualties. Deep within the mangled heart of the parking garage, a mountain of shattered concrete shifted. Battle Beast emerged from the rubble, pushing aside a crumpled car frame like it was tissue paper. His ornate armor was gone, shredded away by the force of Broly's punch, leaving only his thick white fur that was now matted with dust and his own dark dripping blood. Every muscle screamed in protest, and a sharp stabbing pain was in his ribs. It suggested that something was finally cracked within him. A lesser being would have been a pope. A wide, fanged grin split Battle Beast's muzzle, a low, rumbling chuckle building within his chest. The pain was a symphony. The damage was a standing ovation. This boy, this glorious Saiyan, had exceeded his wildest fantasies. This was the challenge he had crossed galaxies to find. Then, he saw him. Broly was walking towards him, emerging from the dust-filled tunnel connecting the two buildings. He was not running. There was no battle cry, no triumphant glare. His advance was a slow, inexorable tide. His eyes, those blazing yellow orbs, held no real recognition, no sport, with no warrior spirit. They were flat, feral, and empty of everything but a bottomless, consuming rage. The emerald energy that wreathed him didn't flicker, though. It burned with the steady, mindless intensity of a star going supernova. Battle Beast's joyous grin faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something unexpected. A profound and devastating understanding. This was not the glorious mutual contest between two apex predators he had dreamed of. He had not unlocked a warrior, he had uncaged a natural disaster. The being advancing toward him was not a contender seeking a worthy rival. It was a force of eradication, and Battle Beast was simply the next thing in its path to be erased. The ecstasy remained, but it was now bittersweet, tinged with the chilling realization that in his quest for the ultimate battle, he had found not a partner in the dance, but the mindless monster in the end of a fairy tale, with a bad ending. With a roar that was equal parts agony and ecstasy, Battle Beast charged. He ignored the screaming protest of his broken ribs, channeling every ounce of his legendary strength into one final definitive swing. His colossal mace, a weapon that had ended empires and shattered continents, cut through the air with the sound of an oncoming storm, aimed not to maim, but to atomize Broly's entire skull. The impact never came, however. Broly's hand, wreathed in a nimbus of destructive green energy, shot up with a casual, dismissive speed. He didn't catch the haft, he caught the business end, the terrifying flanged head of the mace itself. There was a deafening screech of tortured metal as his fingers closed. Then, with a sound like a hydraulic press compacting a soda can, he crushed it. The impossible dense alien alloy did not bend or warp, it imploded, flattening into a useless disc of scrap metal. In his grasp, splinters of the weapon ricocheted harmlessly off Broly's aura. The force of the swing, all of Battle Beast's momentum and might, simply vanished, absorbed by that unbreakable grip, without so much as making Broly's arm even tremble. For a heartbeat, Battle Beast stared, his mind refusing to process the reality. His legendary weapon, his partner in countless glorious battles, had been rendered into a child's crush toy. Broly's feral eyes, devoid of any thought, flickered with annoyance. The beast did not see a worthy opponent. It saw a stinging insect, a buzzing distraction, and with a contemptuous flick of his wrist still holding the ruined mace head, he swatted Battle Beast away. The impact was not the world-shattering collision of their first exchange. It was a dismissive backhand slap, but the force behind it was absolute. Battle Beast felt his feet leave the ground not from a powerful blow, but from the force that treated his immense mass as insignificant. He was flung across the garage like a rag doll, crashing through concrete pillars and parked vehicles before skidding to a stop in a heap of debris, the bitter taste of total, effortless defeat settling in, but he would not go out in a whimper. So he rose back up to the challenge. The dismissive flick of Broly's wrist had been an insult, but the gesture that followed was a total death sentence. His hand still clenched around the crumpled remains of the mace head open. Above his palm, the air itself seemed to curdle and scream. Particles of dust and light were violently drawn into a single, horrifying point, compressing into a sphere of incandescent emerald energy. It was not the controlled humming orb from his training with Eve. This was a raw, screaming singularity of pure rage, a wound in reality that pulsed with the promise of absolute obliteration. There was no focus, no finesse, only the mindless imperative to erase. Battle Beast, pushing himself up from the wreckage of a family sedan, saw the genesis of the green orb. His warrior spirit, though battered, flared in defiance. This was not how his saga would end, vaporized by some mindless beast in the body of a teenager. As Broly's arms extended to launch the sphere, Battle Beast summoned every iota of his speed, his cat-like instincts screaming. He didn't try to block or counter. Survival was the only victory he had left. He pushed off with his powerful legs, not away but at a sharp perpendicular angle. The green sphere left Broly's hand. It didn't fly. It unexisted the air in its path, leaving a brief, shimmering tunnel of a vacuum. It was a tide of annihilation, silent and impossibly fast. Battle Beast was faster, but by a hair's breadth. The sphere missed him by less than a centimeter. The heat of its passage seared his fur, the radiation cooking the skin beneath. He felt the void it created to tug at him, threatening to pull him into its heart. Then it was past him, and his momentum carried him crashing through a weakened concrete wall, back into the shadows of the collapsing garage. The sphere continued its unstoppable path, crossing the street in a blink. Its target was not the open sky, but the skeletal frame of a half-constructed skyscraper, a 40-story lattice of steel beams and unfinished concrete floors. The energy ball struck the building's central support core at its base. There was no dramatic slow-motion collapse. There was only consumption. The sphere expanded upon impact, not as a fireball, but as a voracious emerald bloom. Steel glowed white-hot for a microsecond before subliminating directly into vapor, concrete didn't shatter, it was unmade, reduced to a superheated plasma. The effect raced upward, a wave of dissolution that ate through the building's skeletal floor by floor. The structure didn't fall. It was systematically deleted from the bottom up. One moment it was a monument to future ambition, a dark silhouette against the city lights. The next, a colossal silent flash of green light etched itself into the retinas of every onlooker for miles, followed by a thunderous whoom. That was the sound of thousands of tons of matter being converted instantly into energy and dust. A mushroom cloud of pulverized debris glowing with residual emerald energy rose where the building had stood, raining a fine radioactive-like ash over the entire city block. The mindless beast had not just defeated its foe, it had scarred the city itself, a testament to the cataclysm that walked among them. The primal roar that tore from Broly's throat was a physical force, a wave of concussive fury that shook the very foundations of the ruined parking garage. Every remaining window in the vicinity exploded inward. Outside, the symphony of the city was overridden as car alarms for blocks around blared to life in a frantic, panic chorus, their flashing lights painting the dust-choked air in strobing reds and whites. The sound was cut short as a blast of concussive yellow energy struck him squarely between the shoulder blades. It was like throwing a firecracker at a mountain. The explosion dissipated against his emerald aura without so much as a singeing of his own flesh. The force absorbed like a raindrop into an ocean. But it was a distraction, an irritant. The feral yellow-eyed gaze that slowly turned from the vaporized skyscraper was devoid of reason. It was the gaze of a predator whose kill had been interrupted. He rotated, the movement unnervingly smooth, his massive frame cracking the concrete underfoot, his eyes locked onto the source of the annoyance. There, standing bravely and foolishly in the shattered opening of the garage, was none other than Rex Splode. Smoke curled from his fingertips. Behind him, the rest of the new guardians of the globe were arrayed in a defensive line, Robot hovering with his system calculating a futile battle plan, and the others battered and bloodied, but standing firm. Rex, ever the braggart, even in the face of annihilation, tried to mask the tremor that was in his voice with bravado. "All right, settle down, big guy," he shouted, gesturing with a flick of his wrist. "You've won already. The furry bastard's done for. Now just cool your jets before you go DEFCON 1 on the whole damn city." The words were meaningless, complete noise to the entity that had taken possession of Broly. His mind, submerged in the Berserker's haze, processed only simple, brutal binaries. Friend or foe. Threat or non-threat. The one who had struck him from behind was now speaking. Therefore, he was hostile by his actions. The others stood with him. Therefore, they were also hostile. A low, continuous growl rumbled in Broly's chest, a sound far more terrifying than his roar. The emerald aura around him flared, burning hotter, washing the terrified faces of the heroes in a sickly, apocalyptic light. He had dealt with one irritant. Now he would deal with the others. His feet planted, his shoulders squared, and he fully turned his world-ending attention toward the guardians of the globe. The battle was not over. It had simply found some new targets. The world had narrowed to the emerald inferno that was Broly. Rex's bravado evaporated as the Saiyans' feral yellow eyes locked onto them. The low growl vibrating through the concrete floor was a promise of their imminent extinction. "Well, that didn't work," Rex squeaked, backpedaling. "New plan. Anyone? Running feels like a great plan. Maybe that's the new plan." Before others could move, Broly took a single ground-shaking step forward. The intent in his posture was clear. He was going to plow through them and keep going until there was nothing left to destroy. "Stand firm," Robot commanded, his voice a stark synthetic calm against a rising tide of panic. He hovered forward, a flurry of data from the vaporized skyscraper still scrolling across his internal displays. Direct physical confrontation is statistically impossible. He has absorbed Invincible's strongest blows and dismissed Battle Beast. He dismissed Battle Beast, who had absorbed Invincible's strongest blows, so our attacks are less than insect stings to him. "So we just stand here and die?" One of Duplicate's bodies snapped, while another two helped the third to his feet. "No," the robot stated. We utilize his current state against him. His respiratory rate is elevated. His metabolism is burning energy at an unsustainable rate. He is a furnace. We do not try to douse the furnace. We introduce an impurity into its fuel. He turned his head slightly, a red lens focusing on duplicate. Kate, I am transmitting a chemical formula to your comms. It is a hyper-concentrated neuroinhibitor, aerosolized in theory. It should short-circuit his autonomic nervous system and induce immediate catatonia. In theory? Multiple Kates echoed in unison. The Mahler twins were developing a prototype. I have refined it, but I lack the components and the time to synthesize it here. A schematic of complex chemical compound appeared on the wrist display of every Kate. The ingredients are obtainable. You will need to split your focus, send the majority of yourselves to the various stores in the city. The required elements are listed. That's a grocery list across different stores in the city. He'll kill us all before I can get the first one. A Kate protested. You will not be alone, Robot said, his voice dropping to a grim tactical frequency. The rest of us will provide a distraction. We will not attack him directly. We will engage in evasive maneuvers and target the environment around him. Our sole objective is to buy you time. We must enrage him, confuse him, and keep him contained to this immediate area for as long as possible. It is the only variable that we can control. As if on cue, Broly let out another deafening roar and lunged. The time for planning was over. The desperate, suicidal holding action had begun. Dozens of duplicates scattered in every direction, some towards vehicles, some towards the sky, to climb the top of buildings, while the remaining Guardians braced themselves, not to win, but to survive long enough for a single, desperate, maybe, to even have a chance. For 10 agonizing minutes, the parking garage and the street outside became a chaotic, high-stakes arena. The Guardians executed Robot's desperate plan with the precision of a SWAT team and the terror of prey circling a sleeping dragon. Black Samson initiated the strategy, slamming his fist into the ground, activating the smoke canisters, creating a dense smoke screen that enveloped Broly. The Berserker snarled, his feral eyes scanning the opaque cloud, momentarily disoriented. This was Monster Girl's cue. She used her powerful legs, propelling her toward a line of abandoned cars, and with a grunt and a heave of her muscular arms, she tossed the sedan high into the air, arcing it into the smokescreen like a metallic offering. Light it up, Rex, she bellowed. Or I guess it's Monster Girl's voice. Light it up, Rex, she bellowed. Rex exploded, perched on a crumbling overhang. Didn't need to be told twice. He slapped his palms together, and a glowing volatile orb shot forth, hitting the gas tank, connected with the tumbling car mid-air, resulting in an explosion that wasn't meant to harm Broly, but to disorient him further. The concussive blast wave tore through the smokescreen, accompanied by a rain of shrapnel and a flash of fire that illuminated the enraged Saiyan within. Broly roared, swatting at the fallen molten metal as if it was a swarm of gnats. Whenever he would fixate on one of them and begin to power through the chaos, Robot would intervene. Hovering at a safe distance with his chest plate would slide open, projecting a series of intense strobing holographic patterns directed into Broly's line of sight. There were dizzying spirals and rapidly shifting geometric shapes designed to overload a primitive visual cortex. Broly would falter, shaking his head with a guttural growl. His charge broken as his brain tried to process the nonsensical assault on his senses. It was a terrifying ballet of evasion and misdirection. They were skittering around a localized apocalypse, using the city's ruins as their tools. They shattered support pillars to create new obstacles, detonated gas mains to create walls of fire, and used every trick to keep the mindless Titan turning in circles, his rage burning hot but unfocused. They weren't fighting him. They were feeding his fury with distractions, buying precious seconds for the dozens of duplicates, now frantically ransacking chemical supply stores across the city. But with every passing second, Broly's adaptations began to grow faster, his rage sharper, and the Guardian's margin for error was quickly evaporating. The group were a whirlwind of misdirection, using smoke explosions, holographic strobes to keep the mindless Titan disoriented. But Broly's adaptations were swift, and his rage was a learning algorithm. His feral eyes, blazing with malevolent yellow light, finally pierced through the chaos and locked onto the source of the most irritating logical interference, which was Robot. There was no wind-up, no tail. One moment, Broly was 20 yards away, swatting at one of Rex's explosive ornaments. The next, he was simply there, directly right in front of Robot, his presence sucking the air from the space. Before Robot's systems could even process the movement, a massive green wrist hand shot out and seized him by the throat. The armored casing of his neck groaned in protest. Tactical error. Critical. Robot's synthesized voice crackled, cut short, as Broly lifted him bodily from the ground. Robot! Black Samson yelled, charging forward, his own power flaring in a desperate attempt to draw fire. It was the worst move he could have made. Broly's head swiveled, his gaze shifting from the struggling android in his grasp to the charging hero. With a guttural snarl of pure annoyance, he used the robot as a living bludgeon, and he swung the armored form in a brutal horizontal arc, slamming Robot directly into Black Samson's chest. The impact was sickening. The sound of reinforced armor and bone cracking echoed through the garage. Samson was lifted off his feet, his body folding around Robot's with a devastating force. The two heroes were hurled together in a stack of support pillars, collapsing in a tangled heap of metal and broken flesh, and unmoving. No! The scream was raw, furious, and Monster Girl, in her powerful form, hulking form, saw her teammates, her friends, brutalized and discarded. Rage overrode strategy, and she launched herself at Broly's back, her fist pulled back to deliver a blow that could shatter a tank. Broly didn't even fully turn. His free hand, impossibly fast, shot back and caught her massive fist in his palm, stopping the punch dead with a sound like a clap of thunder. Her eyes widened in shock. His grip tightened, and the bones in her hand audibly cracked. A flicker of pain crossed her bestial features. Then, with a contemptuous twist, Broly yanked her forward, spinning her off balance. As she stumbled past him, he drove his other fist, still holding the crumpled mace head, forward in a short, brutal piston punch. It wasn't a wild swing, it was a precise, devastating stab. The ruined metal in his knuckles tore through her side with a wet, horrific crunch. Monster Girl let out a choked, gurgling cry, her body going rigid. A torrent of crimson blood poured from the ghastly wound, splashing across the concrete and Broly's arm. He released her fist, and she collapsed to her knees, then onto her face, as a dark, rapidly expanding pool of red formed beneath her. From the wreckage, a spark of static erupted from Robot's broken form. His optimal sensors flickered, casting a dim red light on the scene. He was powerless to move, powerless to help, forced to watch as the creature he had calculated as a threat systematically dismantled his team. For the first time, a synthetic crackle of pure, undiluted fury and despair escaped his vocalizer. He was a being of logic, and the logic of this situation was an unbearable personal hell. Rex Splode was out of tricks and out of quips, and nearly out of hope. He watched frozen, as the green demon turned its gaze from the fallen forms of Monster Girl and the others. It was over. They were all dead. They just hadn't stopped moving yet. A low, painted grunt sounded right next to him, making him jump. Ugh! From a shadowed alcove, leaning heavily on his shattered mace's shaft like a crutch, emerged Battle Beast. The Leonine warrior was a ruin. His fur was matted with blood and dust. His breathing was a wet rasp, and one of his arms hung at a grotesque-like angle. But his eyes still burned with the fire of battle. You, Battle Beast rumbled, his voice gravelly with pain. He shoved the link of his weapon shaft toward Rex. The noisy one. Your power. You imbue objects with kinetic energy, yes? Rex stared bewildered. Yeah? So? So stop gawking and do it. Battleby snarled, thrusting the shaft into Rex's hands. Pour every ounce of your strength into this. Make it a spear that could pierce a star. Driven more by instinct than understanding, Rex grabbed the shaft. It was surprisingly light, yet felt impossibly dense. He closed his eyes, focusing, pouring every last drop of his energy into this alien metal. The shaft began to vibrate, then hum, glowing with a dangerous, unstable orange light. It felt like holding a live power line. It's going to blow. Rex swore, his arms trembling. Now, throw it. Aim for his chest, Battle Beast commanded. With a final desperate heave, Rex launched the supercharged shaft. It flew like a javelin, traveling orange light, a perfect focus line of destructive force aimed straight for Broly's heart. And in that same instant, Battle Beast found one last impossible reserve of strength. He pushed off with his powerful legs, ignoring the scream of his broken body, and charged. He wasn't running away from the projectile, he was running with it. A step behind, using it as a shield, a distraction, the opening move of his final glorious charge. The glowing shaft struck true, impacting Broly's chest with a spectacular explosion of orange kinetic energy. It wasn't enough to pierce him, but it did stagger him. A grunt of surprise forced from his lips as his emerald aura flickered, leaving his flesh vulnerable. In that single moment of distraction, Battle Beast was upon him. With the triumphant feral roar that defied his injuries, he leaped, his one good arm swinging forward, his claws extended like daggers. He didn't aim for a killing blow because he knew it wouldn't happen. He aimed for a victory. His claws raked across Broly's side, digging deep, and for the first time they drew more than a superficial scratch. A line of crimson welled up on Broly's torso. The victory lasted for a heartbeat. Broly's surprise morphed into an incandescent rage. This insect had not only stung him, it had drawn blood. His hand, faster than thought, snapped up and caught Battle Beast by the throat mid-leap, halting his momentum utterly. The Leonine's warrior's eyes bulged, his triumphant roar cut off with a choked gargle. Broly lifted him effortlessly up, his grip tightening, the bones in Battle Beast's neck creaking under the pressure. The feral yellow eyes stared into the defiant yellow ones, one set mindless, the other accepting. This was the end, and Battle Beast would meet it on his feet, having finally drawn blood from his strongest opponent. Just as the crushing pressure was about to snap Battle Beast's spine, a new sound cut through the chaos, the squeal of tires and the roar of overpowered engines. Several black nondescript vans, their doors marked with GDA emblems, skidded to a halt at the periphery of the ruined garage. The doors flew open and a small army of duplicates, over 24 of them, poured out, and they moved with a single unified purpose, hauling out bulky, hastily assembled canisters connected to a central nozzle array. At the center of them was the primary Kate, her face set in a grim mask of determination. Now! She screamed, her voice multiplied to a chorus. The Kates aimed the contraption at Broly. With a hiss of pressurized gas, a thick yellowish cloud erupted from the nozzles, enveloping Broly and the still struggling Battle Beast in a choking chemical fog. It was the neuroinhibitor, their last desperate gamble. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Broly's enraged roar turned into a fit of violent hacking coughs. His grip on Battle Beast's neck loosened, and the Leonine warrior dropped to the ground, gasping for clean air. As he crawled away, Broly staggered back, swatting at the cloud, his movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. The terrifying emerald aura around him flickered and dimmed significantly. He clutched at his throat, his feral eyes wide with a new primal sensation, suffocation and systemic shock. A collective held breath was released by the remaining guardians. Rex let out a shaky, triumphant laugh. Holy hell, it's working. The big guy's choking. We got him. For a glorious, fleeting moment, it looked like they had done it. Through sacrifice, coordination, and a miracle, they had contained the uncontainable. The chemical agent was swarming his system, short-circuiting the Berserker rage, and he was vulnerable, beatable, and the tide was turning. And then, it didn't. Broly's coughing ceased. His staggered movement stilled. He stood straight within the dissipating yellow cloud. His head bowed. A low, deep thrumming began to emanate from him, a sound that was felt more than heard. He took a single deep, clearing breath and then exhaled. It was not a normal exhalation. It was a concussive blast of pure raw ki. A visible shockwave of emerald energy erupted from his body in a perfect sphere, hitting the chemical cloud with the force of a miniature neutron bomb. The green gas was utterly and instantly dissipated. shredded into nothingness by the overwhelming power and force. The duplicates were thrown off their feet, their makeshift dispensers shattered into thousands of pieces. The shockwave hit the remaining heroes like a physical wall, sending them tumbling backward. The cloud was gone, and standing in the center of the cleared space was Broly, his aura roaring back to life, brighter and more violent than ever. The brief window of vulnerability had slammed shut, his head lifted and his feral eyes now glowing with renewed and even more intense hatred. He scanned the room and found Rex explode first. Rex was lying on his back amidst the rubble, and he met that gaze. All the color drained from his face. The hope that had flickered in his eyes was dead, replaced by the hollow, certain truth of their situation. His lips moved, barely a whisper, but the words carried the weight of their utter defeat. We're screwed. The concussive blast of ki that vaporized the neuroinhibitor cloud was the death knell for the Guardian's hope. The emerald aura that roared back to life around Broly wasn't just a return to form, it was an escalation, a visible manifestation of a system that pushed past its limits and was now burning on pure, unfiltered hatred. The air itself seemed to boil around him, shimmering with a heat haze, as he fixed his feral yellow-eyed gaze on Rex explode. Rex whispered again, "We are so screwed." It was less of a statement and more of a final grim epitaph for them all. Broly's muscles coiled, the concrete beneath his feet disintegrating into a powder as he prepared to lunge and erase the source of the last irritating sting that remained. But the lunge never came. The world did not explode in a flash of green. Instead, it was washed in a soft, pervasive pink. A massive, translucent cube of solid pink energy materialized around Broly, and with a gentle thrum, it was not a cage born of aggression. It did not slam shut, it simply was, appearing instantaneously to encase him completely. The interior surfaces glowed with a gentle ambient light, muting the chaotic sounds of the crumbling garage and the frantic shouts of the heroes. The sudden profound silence inside the construct was as jarring as the previous cacophony. Broly snarled, his head whipping around, his berserker instincts identifying a new confinement. He drove a fist into the wall. The impact was absorbed with a deep resonant boom. But the pink wall held, not even shuddering. It was less of a barrier and more of like an absolute fact, like the laws of physics that the laws of physics made manifest. Then she descended. From above, Adam Eve floated down, landing softly just outside the cube. Her costume was pristine, a stark contrast to the blood and dust that now painted the battlefield. She didn't adopt a fighting stance. Her hands were open at her sides, and her expression was one of intense, focused calm, not of fear or anger. "Broly," her voice was soft, yet it carried with perfect clarity through the energy field, a lifeline thrown into a storm. "It's me, Eve." The beast inside him, the Ikari, saw only a target. It lunged at the wall separating them, hammering against its fist, wreathed in destructive energy. Boom, boom. The cube held a patient, unyielding bastion against the tempest. "Look at me," she insisted, her voice unwavering. She took a slow, deliberate step closer, placing a hand flat against the outside of the cube. The gesture was intimate, not confrontational. "You know me. We're alone here. There's no one left to fight. There's no more enemies." Her words were a deliberate recalibration of reality. She systematically dismantled the battlefield that was within his own mind. The beast was gone. The soldiers were gone. The fight was over. With each statement, she gestured vaguely to the quiet, contained space that was around them, her pink cube having visually and audibly isolated him from the external chaos. His relentless assault on the walls began to slow. The mindless rage was being starved of its fuel. The noise, the threats, the movement, the silence she had created was a vacuum, and in that vacuum, a flicker of something else had room to breathe. "You don't have to fight anymore," Eve whispered, her forehead nearly touching the energy barrier. Her eyes locked with his feral yellow ones. And then she gave him an anchor. "Remember the beach, the black sand. You drew the energy down your arms. You asked it to gather in your hands. You gave it a shape." The memory, a moment of hard-won control and shared purpose, pierced the berserker's haze like a shard of a crystal. The green aura around him flickered, not with power, but with instability. His furious snarls quieted to a ragged, confused pants. The yellow glow in his eyes didn't vanish, but it wavered, and for the first time since his transformation, a flicker of dark pupils was visible within the blazing suns of his irises. He was still the Ikari, but the door to the cage inside his mind, held shut by rage, had been nudged open by a familiar voice and the memory of a quiet, controlled orb of light held gently in his palm. The monster hesitated, and the boy, terrified and traumatized, once again began to peer out. The relentless hammering against the inside of the pink cube slowed, then ceased. The guttural snarls died in his throat, replaced by a ragged, confused breath. The incandescent green aura flickered like a dying candle, sputtered and winked out entirely. Inside the sudden quiet was a voice, small and fractured, and it escaped Broly's lips. Eve? The sound was nothing like the roaring tempest of moments before. It was the voice of a boy waking from a nightmare, disoriented and afraid, grasping for a familiar anchor in a world that had dissolved into chaos. Hearing that single vulnerable word, Adam Eve didn't hesitate. With a thought, the massive pink cube dissolved into a shower of harmlessness, fading motes of light. There was no longer a need for a barrier. The real threat was gone, leaving only the aftermath. Broly stood swaying slightly, the immense power that had swollen his frame seeming to recede, leaving him looking strangely hollow. The terrifying yellow fire that was in his eyes drained away, the blazing sun shrinking back into the familiar deep black pupils that she recognized. He blinked, his vision clearing, and truly saw her for the first time since the rage had taken him. Standing there, unharmed, her hands still outstretched, her expression filled not with fear but with profound and aching pity. Then his gaze traveled past her. He saw the canyon. He had torn through the city, the vaporized skyscraper still raining fire, glowing ash. He saw the obliterated parking garage, the craters, the twisted rebar, and the scattered broken forms of the Guardians. He saw Black Samson the robot lying in a heap. He saw Monster Girl's massive forms collapse in a dark wet pool of her own blood. And he saw Rex, pale and terrified, staring at him from the rubble. The memory of it all crashed down on him, not as a berserker's haze, but with the crystal clear, horrifying clarity of a witness. He remembered the feeling of Battle Beast's mace crumbling in his hand. He remembered the casual, dismissive flick that had sent the Leonine warrior flying. He remembered the mindless imperative to destroy that had turned his friends into target practice. A low, wounded sound escaped him. The devastation was his footprint. The broken heroes were his doing. The tears he had been fighting since the flaxen world finally welled up, pooling in his now human eyes, shimmering with the reflected light of the ruin he had wrought. He was a catastrophe, a plague. He opened his mouth, perhaps to utter an apology that could never be enough, but before a single word or the first tear could fall, Eve moved. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against the scarred, grime-covered skin of his chest. The hug was not timid or hesitant, it was firm, an unbreakable tether to the present, pulling him back from the precipice of his own despair. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice muffled against him by unwavering. "It's not your fault." The words were a shield against a self-loathing that was threatening to consume him. She didn't say it was okay that people were hurt, or that the city was damaged. She said he was okay, that the guilt he carried was not his to bear alone. In that embrace she absorbed the tremors that racked his massive frame, offering a forgiveness he could never grant himself, and silently telling him that the monster was now gone, and the boy he was had come home. Alright, man, that's the end of this episode. Hope you guys liked it. If you did like it, you already know. Hit that like button, share, subscribe, all that. Super chats are open. Memberships are open. I will catch y'all on the next one.